All right, so constraint layouts. Before we get started, how many people, constraint layouts have been around for a little while. I think 1.0 was announced earlier this year, probably towards the beginning of this year. So it's not brand new. How many people here have worked with constraint layouts at all? Or an intermediate amount, or what you would say a lot? Any amount, just about 3-ish, 4?
When you generate a new project, it generates with constraint layout.
It does, yeah. Yep. And you can choose to ignore it if you want, but exactly. I hear that a lot. How many people here are iOS developers or have iOS experience? All right. None of you guys are welcome to the Rusty Bucket. No. Just joking. So how many of you guys have used auto layout? I assume a lot of the iOS developers. I won't claim to be an expert with constraint layout or auto layout, but I think there's similarities between the two. So if you come from one, then this might not sound too foreign to you. When I was at Big Nerd Ranch a while back and I was being taught auto layout, an analogy to me was if you're putting up Christmas lights, I guess either on the house or on a tree, and you've got, it clumps up in like a ball, and like you might be trying to put it up, but you pull and that whole ball just comes along with you. That's kind of like maybe a weird analogy to keep in mind with a constraint layout. Everything's constraint based, so you tie all of your views together, and once they're tethered together, you can move them around, but it's kind of like if you move this one and they're tied together, it might move this other one with you. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so a list of objectives that hopefully we'll get out of this. Just to level set expectations, this is pretty, I would say, basic constraint layout. So since not many people have worked with it, hopefully there'll be something new in here for everybody. I'm hoping to encourage people to use it. I enjoyed it. I've used it for one project, so I won't claim to be an expert with it, but I thought it was enjoyable. So we'll talk about what a constraint layout is. Some constraint layout basics. Talk about a layout bias, which I'll get it all into more detail, all these in a little bit. Some layout properties, guidelines, which help you with constraints. View chaining, so that's a little bit more intermediate, I guess I would say, but it's a useful concept to understand. Constraint sets, which would be setting up your constraint layout programmatically or modifying it programmatically. Some basic animations, and then we'll get into some pros and cons, at least how I see them. So just my own views. Custom views, I should have taken that out. I didn't get into that. All right, so what is a constraint layout? I just talked about them a little bit. You're supposed to be able to create large and complex layouts in a flat view hierarchy. I say you're supposed to, that's the goal. I would say you can, but as you get more complex, it can be more complex. It gets a little bit more challenging, but it is achievable. With constraint layouts, everything is with peers and parents. So the goal is to have a flat view hierarchy. So I would recommend that if you use this, start out with a goal of not having any nested children. You inevitably will need to bend that rule probably, but start out with that goal and then try to hit that. And if you do, you're really just working with peers and then parents, which you'll see in a little bit. And that's how you pull the dependency into the projects in the support library. I actually think there's when you are looking at your dependencies in Android Studio, I think it's actually its own repo. It's a constraint layout repo. Could be wrong about that. It's been a little bit. And 1.0.2 was of the time that I put this together. All right, so constraint layout basics. So each constraint represents a connection to another view, the parent layout, or an invisible guideline. So it gets into a little bit what I was just talking about a little bit earlier also. And I'll show you some examples in a little bit. But if you think of a view just as a box, it could either be a view or view group. So constraint layout is a view group, so it contains children. And if you keep things simple and just view everything as flat hierarchy and no nesting involved in it, then you have a bunch of views in there, and then you're going to have to draw connections between those views. And also, I should say, the GUI editor in Android Studio is actually, I think at least, pretty useful for this. I think it's probably the first GUI editor that I've actually enjoyed doing like some drag and drop with. I kind of forced myself to do it because I thought it was going to be stupid, but it was actually kind of enjoyable. You can also easily go back to the XML and edit it. But the properties are actually kind of long, so I found that I actually enjoyed using the GUI editor. So with each view, when you drag and drop it into the GUI, if that's what you're using, it'll put it in there and it'll look like, oh, that's where it's at. But it's not actually. If you run it, it'll slam it in the top left or top upper left. So what it's doing is there's this tool, the tools namespace, and so it positions the X and Y of where you drop it just so you can easily see it in the editor to move it around and drag connections. As a rule, each view needs to have, or view group that's in there, needs to have at least one horizontal and vertical constraint. And that'll tie it to whatever position where you see it in the editor. So I'm going to put up two images here. Hopefully everybody can see this. So there's three boxes here, A, B, and C, and it might look like there's a lot of arrows, but there is one view here that is not constrained properly. Two views are constrained properly. So for example, with A, you can see, I don't have a mouse here. I don't know if this laser works, does it? Let's see if it does. So you can see there's the horizontal constraint right there to A, and there's the vertical constraint to A. And so one of these views is not properly constrained. So I don't know if anyone can guess which one it is.
It's C.
Wow, good. Yes, so you're constrained horizontally twice, but you are not constrained vertically at all. So this thing could be, in the layout editor, it could be sitting right here, but when you run it, it'll be slammed all the way up to the top. But it'll be constrained left and right properly. So if you want to constrain it vertically, you can put that right there, and that's saying I want C to be below A. And A is constrained already left and right, so it'll always be below where A is. And this is back to the analogy with the Christmas lights. If you're in the editor and you click and drag A around, it'll, depending on how the constraints are set, it'll likely also drag C up with it. And I can play with this a little bit later so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this is just a quick little GIF to show you how to add a left constraint in the GUI editor. So this is a snippet taken out of the editor. And what you'll see is these little bubbles here on the sides. And if you want to constrain it to the parent or the parent container, all you do is you just grab right here and then you drag over to here and let go. And that's what the video will show. For a sneak peek into the future of the slides, this little hashed line right here is a guideline, and you'll see that in a little bit. So you can see it was real quick, but he just clicked and then dragged it over. It pops an arrow in there. You'll see what I hit right there. That's the margin, 24 dp. The arrow is showing you the constraint. So pretty simple. It's only anchored to the left right now. So if you want to anchor it to the right also, which wouldn't include then the vertical constraint, but all you do is the same thing to the other side. And you'll see by default it's now snapped into the middle, and maybe you'll wonder why or what it's doing there. What are these, what are the little squiggly lines right there? We'll talk about that in a little bit. By default, it'll center itself in the middle. And once you put a constraint up to the top or bottom, where it shows in the layout here gives you a pretty good idea of where it'll show when you run it. It should be exact, actually. All right, so alignment. A lot of times when you're doing views, you need things to be aligned properly. And I ran into this issue pretty quickly, and it took me longer than I feel like it probably should have to figure it out. It seems like the answer is pretty easy, since I'm telling you here. I thought I was kind of dumb for not knowing it, but you align the edge of a view to the same edge of another view. And so you just draw the constraint from one view to the other. The first picture actually had an example of that. That's right here. So if you want B to have the same left or start alignment of A, you just draw that constraint right there. My fancy animation, yeah. All right, so here's XML. So before you start off with this is what everybody should probably be accustomed to. Maybe this would be sitting in a relative layout without any relative positioning or anything, but it's just standard properties. For the constraint layout, when you're drawing and dragging these constraints, what's really happening to the text is it's adding these properties here. They're pretty long and maybe slightly annoying to type. You do get code completion, but it makes sense if you read them. So layout constraint end to end of is saying I want the end of this view, this button here, to be to the end of and then the parent. So it's going to take the right edge and then constrain it to the right side of the parent. So it's going to align it to the right. And then the same thing with the start. So that's the left edge. So that's on the left. And then the constraint top to bottom of. Sometimes you have to take a step back and like really actually read these, because if you skip over them, you can easily misread them. So the top of this button is going to be laid out to the, or constrained to the bottom of this particular, what looks like a text view. And so it's going to be below that text view. So you can easily ignore the whole GUI editor and just come in here and type these out if you want, if that's what you would prefer. And that works relatively easily. I bounce back and forth. I tend to try to use the GUI, and then if I need to, because the GUI sometimes can be a little glitchy or buggy still, I'll go into the XML and just edit it.
Do you change the DP there, or they have that default DP of like?
Oh, the margin? Yeah, you can change that, and I'll show you that in a little bit. It's actually this, I think it's still just this normal layout margin end and start right here. That's 8 dp. You could change that. You can also change it in the GUI, and I'm pretty sure it just updates that same property right there. So constraint bias. Again, just going through more of the fundamentals of a constraint layout. So like the earlier example, when you added a left and right constraint and it just snapped to the middle, that's the first thing you need to do in order to start playing with a constraint bias. By default, there's a 50% bias which centers the view. So you saw that thing, just the box just snapped towards the middle. That's considered or called a 50% bias. I should say there's a horizontal and vertical bias. So if you want the vertical, you just constrain the top and bottom. So adjust the bias to change the position of the view. Seems pretty straightforward. I'll just go ahead and show it to you. It's probably a little bit easier than describing. What you'll see when this plays out, after he constrains to the right, there'll be something that pops up where I think it's right around in this area. And that'll be the horizontal constraint. It's a little slider that you can just move back and forth. So he left it at 18. You can also drag the actual image there. So now it's at 25. So if you go into the XML, it'll say horizontal constraint bias or something along those lines, and it'll say 25 or 0.25. I can't remember if it's decimal or not. So that allows a fair amount of flexibility, and it's pretty important to know. Oftentimes you'll have a constraint left and a constraint right and also on the top, and you don't want it where it ends up and you just want it over a little bit. You just drag that slider around. Same thing with the vertical. So layout properties. So most people are familiar with, probably familiar with wrap content. As far as a constraint layout goes, it's the same thing. The view itself, so if you put a button or any other view in a constraint layout and set it to wrap content, the view expands to fit its contents. So that's no different than if it were in a relative layout or any other kind of view group. Match constraints. This is new. So the view expands to fit the needs of the constraint. So if you have just simply one view in a parent and you constrain it left and right to the edge of the parent, it'll take up the full width. So if you have a button and it's got a small amount of text and you can constrain it left and right and you say match constraints, the button will take up the full width of the screen. And then fixed. So you can just give it a fixed 100 dp width or 100 dp height. So that's the same as before also. And an important note, do not use match parent within a constraint layout. It still works if you play around with it. I honestly don't know what the side effects could potentially be, but I didn't want to find them out. And for the little that I played, I don't know. You're supposed to use constraint or this, what did I say? Oops, I said it right there. Go back here. the match constraints. Use that instead. And when you're editing in XML, that would be 0 DP. So that's similar to if you're, when you use that, like layout weights or something like that. Similar to that. So 0 DP means match constraints. It's kind of weird. In XML, it won't say match constraints. If you're using the GUI editor, it does say match constraints. But that just translates to 0 DP. And so if you think about it, that's kind of similar to match parent. If you want the button to take up the full width of the screen, that would be match parent. That's the same thing as match constraint. So guidelines. On that first image I showed you guys, that's the kind of like the hashed line. So it's an invisible line to the users. And if you have, you would use this if you want to constrain to something, but you don't have an actual view. So you just drop a constraint or a guideline in there, and then you can constrain to it. It can be horizontal or vertical, and it can be positioned via DP or %, and it's relative to the edge. So when you're dragging it, so you can drag, if it's a vertical one, you can drag it left and right, horizontal, up and down. And it can be positioned, it'll tell you the DP from the edge, or it can be a %. And there is a difference between the two, of course. So if you drag something to be 50 dp from the edge, and regardless of the size of the device, it'll always be 50 dp from the edge. If you drag something to be 50% from the edge, it's always going to be in the middle of the screen, regardless of the size of the screen. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's a little grayscale, but you can see at the top up there, it shows a little % sign, and then it'll show you 33%. There's a view right here, and its left constraint, or its start constraint, is the guideline right there, and it's got a margin of 24. And so this is, again, back to that Christmas light analogy. If you grab this guideline and just start moving it left and right, this view will be moving with it in real time in the GUI editor. So it just gets dragged along with it, and it always maintains that margin. You can click, I think it's either right here or up here. I think it's up here. And that'll toggle between the DP specific or the %.
Can you have multiple vertical guidelines or multiple horizontal guidelines?
Yes, you can. So I should have said I did write an app illustrating some of these basic concepts, and I'll give a demo and we can look at the code after I get through these slides. So I will show you that. So view chaining. So to me, when I first came into this, view chaining was a little confusing, probably because I didn't feel like I had time to read the documentation, and I didn't want to and got impatient. And so I would say, don't do that. Actually take the time to read it. It's not too long. The concept's not too difficult, really. So it's a group of views linked in a bidirectional manner. So since I'm using horizontal all the time, if you have two views, they need to be linked to each other left and then right. I'll show you a picture in a little bit, but they need to be linking to each other, basically. Once they're linked together, that's called a view chain. And you can do this with any number of views. And I haven't done this, but they also said you could do this vertically and horizontally at the same time. So it can be horizontal or vertical. They classify it into 4 different types. And I'll show you an example of each one of these in a little bit. So it can be spread, spread inside, weighted, or packed. And so here's just a simple example. And so what I was just trying to describe, which is they're linked bidirectionally right there. And then they're both also linked to or constrained to the edges. So they make a chain. This isn't showing the constraint towards the top or bottom, which they would need. So spread, the views in the chain are going to be spread out evenly, which is the default. So if you link them all together, it'll just evenly spread them out, which is what this is showing. So I think that's
equal spacing between them, they could be different sizes themselves.
correct. Yeah, the spacing, yeah, that's a good point. The spacing right here will be the same, but these could be different sizes, yeah. So spread inside, this one's a little odd. I'm sure there's a use for it because they have it. I'm not very creative, so I don't really know, but it anchors the left and the right. They're fixed to the constraint, and then the rest of them, there's only one here, but they'll be evenly distributed in a similar manner as the previous example. weighted. This is applicable only for the spread and the spread inside, and it's similar to layout weight in linear layouts. And so you can specify the weight for each one of these individually, and it's the exact same concept as layout weight for linear layouts. So if, I don't know what they would be here. This looks like it's got a weight of, let's say, maybe 1, and these have a weight of maybe 2 or 3, something like that. But you essentially, it's the same concept if you're familiar with that. I'll show you an example of that also. And then packed, where the views are packed together, which they're just slammed together.
Is that flexible enough so that like the UX you just make a layout and let them move things around and get exactly where you want? You still wind up putting the XML yourself?
I still end up tweaking XML myself. They could. They would need to be educated on the tool, though. Depending on the person, they might want to. But if it's someone that would prefer not to get as in-depth, it just depends on the person, I think, how much they're willing to learn. The tool can be a little complicated if you're not used to it. I'm trying to think, if you're not a developer, coming into you'd have to pull down Android Studio and all that stuff might be a little too much. But if they're interested, they might not be. So I would still say it's probably geared more towards developers still. And so here's just a short video of view chaining or someone doing some view chaining. And they're toggling between the different modes there. So they used a couple shortcuts I haven't talked about, and that's an important note. I'm not going to cover everything that the IDE gives you. There's a lot. I think some of it's pretty self-explanatory or just nice to go in and explore yourself. It is pretty powerful, but what you saw is they just highlighted all the views, and then they right-clicked, and then said center horizontally. So that's not chaining them yet. When they click that, now they're chained together. That's the spread, and then the anchored on the side, and then the packed. And then just to show off, I suppose they wanted to align the top edges. So you can right-click and do that.
But that doesn't give it a vertical constraint, does it? Because there's no constraint to the actual parent constraint.
Right, correct. Yeah, they still need to give a vertical constraint. So like this one right here would need to draw a constraint up top. Or you can constrain any of them to the bottom if you want it towards the bottom.
You don't have to do it on one of them, since the other ones are aligned to it.
Right. Yeah, with chaining, I'm kind of confused why this one actually has the dots showing. The documentation always talks about the leading head being the one that really controls where the chain goes, which would be this one. So I'm not quite sure about this, but just looking at this, I would say you can use this one or any of these down here also. So with constraint layouts, you can do a layout a number of ways. If you wanted this constrained here, you could just draw this up here and then change the bias so that you slide it down to here. Or you could also use any of these constraints to the bottom and slide the bias much higher up so that it's constrained up there. Both of them would work, but as you build out and add more stuff to here, maybe chaining it to the bottom wouldn't work because you might have stuff underneath it. So constraint sets. So it's a way to programmatically define constraints. Let's go through this. So you can do this a few different ways manually. So there's the constraint set object, and you just instantiate it. And then you can manually build this by calling the connect method. And this might be difficult to read the little tooltips, but it says start ID, start slide, end ID, inside, I should say. And so you're saying which view layout ID that's starting with and ending with right there, and then the side. I have not done this really because that seems pretty tedious, but I could see when maybe you would want to do it. When we were using these, we didn't have a reason to. That would build one constraint, so you could constrain the left side to the parent, for example. You can use a layout. I have an example of this later on, and so you would just call clone, and then you pass in the context and then the layout, and it'll take that whole layout file and then read it in and apply the constraints into this constraint set object. And then you can also do a very similar thing with the constraint layout. So if you already have a constraint layout inflated, you can just take that instance and then call clone and it puts it in there. There's another version of this. I use it in my sample app. We'll come back to it and I'll bring it up. I forget what it's called right now. Oh yeah, I'll bring that up later. So now that you have your constraint set, you need to apply it to a constraint layout. So that's just instantiating it. That doesn't do anything with it yet. So you would just take your constraint set. In this case, I have one called constraint set normal, and then you just call apply to, and then you pass in the constraint layout, and then it applies it to it. In this scenario, if you just do this, it'll just reapply it, and boom, it's there. Which then leads us into animations, and you can get some, I'd say basic animations, because from a code perspective, you can do a fair amount without doing much. If you want to do a lot with animations, I'm sure, which I haven't done a whole lot, anything with animations I assume can get tricky pretty quickly. But there's a couple ways to create animations. And this gets a little funky, I think. At least at first it was to me, and I still think it kind of is. But you can do the animations a couple different ways. One is to create XML layout files, and the other one is dynamically via code. When I first was reading about this, I was like, I don't want to create a layout and then essentially the origin or the from and then the to layout, and they're very similar. That seems kind of redundant, which that violates the whole dry principle. It seems kind of silly. It's like, I'm just going to ignore that and go straight to dynamically. And then I realized there might be merits to doing it that way. So we'll take a look at that. Utilize the transition manager for animations. So yeah, that's it. That's all you do for animations. This actually did work for me though. So you apply the new constraints to the constraint layout. So you'll call, oh, there it is. So that load right there, I had mentioned before you do clone. So it's another method called load. The end result's the same thing. It takes in a layout file and it pulls those constraints in that layout file into this guy. As far as the end result, I don't know what the difference would be. I looked into the implementation of this just to see. This one is actually parsing the XML and pulling the constraints into it. The clone is inflating that layout file and then pulling them into the constraint set. So I don't know if one would be more performant over the other. I'm not sure. But either way, for transitions, you would then just call begin delayed transmission or transition on the constraint layout. And then you just do the apply to just like normal. So really you're just adding one extra line right there. And after you call the apply to, it'll do a simple animation. I didn't dive too much more into animations for this. I'll show you a demo of it. It gives it a pretty nice animation. But I believe you can apply easing functions and stuff like that to it. So, and let's go to a demo. So for the demo app, which I'll push the repo up after this presentation, I tried to keep the code itself out of the activities. There's no fragments. It's real simple. If you look in the main activity, let me do this right there. Are you guys able to read that in the back? Okay. This is it, like literally all of it. I wouldn't spend too much time looking at this. There's not much to it really. It is all in Kotlin just because that's the new hotness right now, and I didn't really want to use Java. All the interesting constraint layout stuff is in the layout XMLs. So we can dive into that, and I wonder how this will fit up here. So, don't know how this will work for presentation mode. Alrighty. So this would be a normal layout right here. I mean, I think this is what everyone's pretty much familiar with. You get the preview over here. You can hide or show it depending on whatever your preference is. If you click on the design tab down at the bottom, which you guys can't probably see, it's way down in the bottom left down here, then you get this view right here, which when I'm in this view, I tend to kill as much like this project view that's open over here. Personally, I always just close it because there's too much stuff going on. And you get a view that looks like this, which I know this text over on the left is probably pretty small, but you just get a container of a bunch of widgets, so you can drag and drop stuff onto the GUI. Down here is your component tree. This is actually pretty useful because sometimes you got a bunch of things that overlap each other and it might be difficult to click on them. And if you know which one it is, you can just click on them over here and it highlights them. Over here is your actual layout, and then over here, this top right area is most of what I was talking about where you can do stuff through the GUI. So like, for example, these little icons that are right here indicate wrap content, and you can just hover over them to read the tooltip. It also says right down here what the layout width and height is. You can click on these, and it changes the mode to that's a fixed. So you can see down in the layout width, it changed it to 163. And then if you tap it again, now it's match constraints. And you can see over here, since it's match constraints and it's just constrained left and right, it just took up the full width right there. So you can just click on this and it easily just cycles through it. It even gives you this like nice little animation as you cycle through it. So anyways, that's how I like to use it. Also, there is this whole blue screen here, and what's that called? I forget. Is that right here? Show blueprint. So these three buttons up here can toggle whether or not you have the blueprint. And so you can either have them side by side, you can just have the one or the other. I like to have them side by side, personally at least. So with the blueprint, it kind of removes some of the chrome and clutter, and you can just see the layout itself, which I find to be kind of nice when working with it. You can see the constraints left and right. I thought you could actually, you have to put your mouse over it, and you can see the constraints over here also. So if you're not using the blueprint, you can still see it. This always shows it over here, which I kind of like. It just, for me, is a little bit easier to work with. So it's just personal preference, though. So we're not going to go to here. Let's go to here. Actually, how about I demo the app to you first? Make this a little bit larger. All right. So when you launch the app, you just get a few buttons, and they're all just demoing certain layouts, all with pretty much buttons, so nothing too spectacular. Simple constraints. This looks like it's kind of chaos. If you dive into the code, you can see what's going on. So let's pull that up. Simple constraint. View. Presentation mode. Hopefully that's large enough. So you can see over here is pretty much exactly what this looks like. This is a 6P right here, and holy moly, what did it do? Maybe I shouldn't be flipping back and forth. Hello. Do I have two instances going on? I have two instances going on. That would be why. Okay. All right, so if you take a look at this, this is just the simple constraints example. And so each of these views have a title, which feel free to look at, but let's ignore that for the time being. I've got a button right here. It's constrained to the left and right of the parent on the parent's edge. And you can see up here, there's a constraint. Since there's this, here, I'll just go ahead and click on it. So you can click this right here, and it'll actually delete the left constraint. So as soon as I do that, the left constraint's gone. And now it'll illustrate, you can see just by looking right here that there's no left, there's no bottom constraint. I say that because sometimes views can get a little complicated, and sometimes it's just easier to look up here with what the constraint is. Maybe even if you have like a tiny view, it's just a lot easier to look up here. You can also look here and see there's no constraint. Since I killed that constraint, it slammed to the right. So it's constrained to the top and the right, and the margin over here is 8. I think you were asking how to change that. So all you do is just click this drop down, and they have predefined amounts. They tried to keep it with their material guideline where it's, what is it, an 8x8 grid, I think? Is that what material is? Or 4x4, one or the other. So that's what they suggest, but you can free type in whatever you want. Type in 33, and now there's 33 right there. So super easy to edit. If you want to add the constraint back to the parent, you can easily just click right here, and it puts it back in place. For whatever reason, it put in a margin of 315. I don't know why. So you just put it back to 8. Like I said, this the editor is a little buggy still. I've noticed that when I drag and drop a new view on here, so this is the process of that. If you want to draw a constraint, of course it's going to work now. Often when I drag and drop the view on here, I had to click off of the view and then back into the view, and then I was able to draw the constraint. So like I was saying, this is appearing like it's going to stay right here, but if I run this, it's actually going to be showing up here because there's no vertical or horizontal constraint. So if you want it to appear there, you can just do that, maybe constraint to the bottom. So now it's got constraints on the horizontal and vertical, and if I throw this, let's say, to there, so now it's always going to be below this button, and then now I can play with the vertical bias here, and so I can say move it right there, and then over this way. And so that's just a real basic example. These buttons are all constrained to each other also, so it's not just the parent that I was trying to show here. So the top of this view is to the bottom of this view, and the right of this view is to the left of this view. And so to further illustrate how they're all linked together, if you just click and drag it around, this alone will move, but if I move this down, notice that bottom button moving. And that's because there's a vertical bias that is trying to maintain a certain percentage. If I move this around, it's moving both of these around because they're constrained to each other. And it's trying to maintain that 120 margin, which again, I don't know why it put that there, probably because I clicked and dragged it, I guess. So if I click and drag this, it's moving all of them around because this is dependent on this one, and this one's dependent on this one. So it can get complex pretty quickly. Just keep in mind that when you're building your views. If for whatever reason you decide, holy crap, I need to start over, on a particular view, you can click this button right here, and it deletes all the constraints for that view. So you'll notice all 4 sides now have no constraint. If you want to delete all of them, you can click a similar button up here, and it'll delete all of them. Don't select a particular view and then click this thinking that it's going to delete it for that view. It deletes it for all of them. I've done that a few times. Fortunately, you can just hit Control-Z or Command-Z and it comes back. Hopefully I can flip back and forth now. Constraint bias. This is a pretty simple one. It's just a little slider that I had shown you earlier, or just now. Oh, not that. Okay, so it's all this is showing is that it's probably hard for you guys to see that, but this bottom left view has a bias of 39 and 15, and so that's actually interesting because you see the label actually says 40 and 75. So things got moved around, I guess. I've noticed that a few times. Things move just like a little bit between opening and closing them. It's kind of weird. So that's part of like the little bugginess that I had seen. But that's all this demo is showing, is just showing the various constraints and how you can use them. Just keep in mind if you want to use the horizontal or vertical constraint, they need to have a constraint on both sides, top or bottom. If you have a constraint on only one side, it just slams to that side. Layout properties. So this was just to try to illustrate the properties on the top right. That guy. And so I don't think anything here is new really, so we can skip over this pretty quickly. This one's match constraints, so I just tried to label them, what I was trying to show you. So this one's got a 32 margin. You can see it right there. There's a 32 margin to the top. This one's wrap content. Since the text is wrap content, all it needs to size itself is as big as that. This one is fixed, and so you can see the button's much larger, but I made the width 250 dp, so that's why it's taking up that much more size. And this one's match constraints. So you can see over here, like I was trying to show you, if you click in here, it might be hard to see, but when you click, it shows 0 dp. If you don't click, you can see it says match constraint. So you just click in there, and so it shows 0. If you go to the XML for that particular button, preview. So that would be this one right here. You can see the width and height is 0. So it doesn't say match constraints. It'll always just say 0. Go back to the design. And there's an image here. To get things a little bit more complicated or complex, if you have match constraints for an image is a good use case for this, but it could be any view. For both of them, you'll notice in the top here, there's like this little dog ear. And you can click on that, and it toggles if you want to maintain a certain aspect ratio, which with images, that's a common use case. And so you can see right here, it's saying 9:16 because it's specified right down in this corner here. So you can click that, and it'll toggle, and you can see it just connected a line right here. So that's saying it's being constrained by the height. And if you click it again, it'll go the width. And now the whole image just kind of got altered around a little bit. And you can click it again, and now it just removed it. So now it's not maintaining the aspect ratio. If you click it again, that's back to where I started, but it completely wiped out what I had in there previously. So if you click around, it'll remove what you had previously had in there. And that's where I ended up. But the nice thing is, you can see it updates the view pretty quickly with these things. So that's pretty nice, I think. Guidelines. So in the app here, I put a view on the actual app just to show you where the guidelines are. So you can see there's 2 vertical ones. I think there was the earlier question if you could have multiple. So there's 3 on here. You can have any number. So I put in 2 vertical ones. There's one here, and there's a horizontal guideline here. As you probably can guess, this button's constrained to this one's constrained to this one, and this one's constrained to this one. This guideline text is just ignoring all the guidelines. And so you can see in here where they are. And this might look a little confusing because I put these views directly on top to try to illustrate it when you're using the view. To add a guideline, there's a button up here, and you just click it, and you'll say add a horizontal guideline, and it shows up, and you can just click over here and just drag them up and down. Sorry, right there. So again, if you move this guideline, since this is constrained to it, it moves the button with it, or any other views. And there could be a view way over here that you might not think should be related to this guideline, but if it's chained to all these other views that are ultimately constrained to the guideline, it'll move it. So you have to keep aware of that. But
Can you apply a 3D interpretation transform to the guideline?
I don't know.
So you could like animated warp effects and the whole UI inside of those guidelines.
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. All I've done with animation so far is you would have layout here and then like the end layout. As far as like what effect to apply to them, I haven't played around with much. But that's an interesting question.
What's the deal with the blue lines on the emulator?
Oh, here. So I tried to be helpful. I added these 3 views here. They're just 2 dp to show you where. So you can't see the guideline on the emulator. Let me comment these out.
Oh, okay. But you just put them in just okay.
Yeah, just so you could see where they're at. If I know how to comment, there we go. I've been away for too long. So when I take those out, you can see now it's invisible here. And also, over here you can see they're just dashed, which is what they look like. I had a view sitting on top of them, so they didn't look dashed. So yeah, that might have been a little confusing. I tried to make it not confusing.
That's cool. That's
But yeah, so when you run the app, you can see where they're at on that screen. I don't think I used guidelines on the project that I used when I first used these, and I think I probably should have or could have. Like I said, you can do views in many different ways, and I got things working, but I think I could have simplified things a lot with guidelines. I also just think it's interesting that you can change it between static and dynamic, the percent up here. You click up there. Where do you click at? Up there. Well, now it's not going to work for me, of course. But I was just playing around with this, and you can change these, the view right here between the different devices. So these are all percent based. So this is a 6P. Even if I load up a 10.1 inch device, you can see these buttons are going to stay in that same percent. But if you do it statically, it'll obviously look a lot further to the left. So, and the chains. So these are all those various different chaining modes that I was showing you guys earlier. I tried to label the buttons of the mode that they're in. And here's the layout for that. Oh, and I should have shown you guys the XML for all of these. So this one's got a slew of buttons. The layout itself isn't that complex. If you guys are writing an app, I'm sure will come across a more complex layout that you might feel the need to nest, but if you can resist that, usually you can figure out a way to not nest with a constraint layout. All these views are flat. So you can see they're all just one layer deep. They're all within a constraint layout. For all of these, I built them with the GUI editor, and then only time I came in here was just to look to see what it generated. So I didn't actually tweak anything for these. If you get a little bit more complex, you might need to. In fact, it puts in some tooltips for you. So I even edited the text in there, like the button labels and stuff. There's properties to do that. And like this guy I made too small. The text size I made 10 SP. And it put in this ignore too small, I guess. Well, that's right, it was complaining, so I told it to. Never mind. So here's the layout for this. Let me put this back to 6P. All right, so you can see this already is getting a little maybe difficult to read. Like if you first open this up, it might be like, holy crap. But if you just are patient with it, it's not too difficult really. And like I said, you can click the buttons over here, or the views, and it'll toggle through them, and you can see which ones it's highlighting. And you can easily already see in here, it's hard to see some of these constraints maybe because they get real tight. And so you can just look up here and see where they're constrained and what the margins are, things like that. There's more properties over here I didn't go into detail about, but there is like the text right here. You can just type the text in there if you want to. So the chaining here, you can see if I drag that around, you can see the chain little icon or whatever a little bit better. But these guys are packed. If you click on this chain like the little sample was showing, it'll unpack them and then slide them between all the various different modes. The weighted here. So this was one time I actually did drop to the XML, I think. Go over here. So where is that? Can you, let's put that up there. Hopefully you guys are able to read that. There's a property here called layout horizontal weight. Go that way. There we go. And so this guy I set to a 2. And so it's just like any layout weight. If I set this to a 3, it's going to have higher weight than the other guys. And so it takes up a little bit more room. The other guys' weights are 1 and 1. So the total right now is 5. So this is taking up 3/5 of the screen. And so that's kind of percentage based also. So if you change the screen size, that'll maintain these relative sizes to each other. I think that's it with chaining. You can definitely get more advanced. I did not try to chain these guys horizontally and vertically to each other. I was reading you can make grid layouts pretty easily by doing that. Well, I guess easily in quotes maybe. Seems like that could get ugly to me, but you can try that. To chain is pretty easy. So just like that video is showing, you can just drag a button, another button, and another button. So they're all just kind of laid on there haphazardly. Just highlight them all. And so under center, then you can say create horizontal or vertical. I'll do a horizontal chain, and now they're chained together. And then if I wanted to, you can just do that. And then now they should all appear. Actually, hold on a second. Let me try something. There we go. I think now they should all appear. Oh, another way to check if you're curious if they should all appear, so I was wrong. If you expand this out, this little component, you can see, hopefully you can see, hopefully it's not too low, this little guy right here. So this is telling me just a typical warning. I've got a string that's not externalized. This one's saying it's not constrained vertically, so it's going to jump to the left. So I think this is similar in iOS. They give you like a little thing that tell you if there's errors or not. This will do it just view by view instead of, I think, just in totality. It's been a while since I've been doing that with iOS, but so it's saying that these do need to all be
Well, you need to like align the top of.
constrained. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Oh, align the top like they were doing? Let's do
Yeah,
that.
that's what
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Whoops. So what did they do? Highlight all those, right click, align top edges. All right, so let's grab these.
Now you just need to anchor one of them.
Yeah, so in their video, this little dot was open over here, which I thought was kind of weird. And I wonder if I just anchor one, if they're all fine. Yeah, now they're all fine. So it takes the head of the chain to anchor all of them then in that scenario.
Or you can do the top dot there, anchor the top.
Yes, or you could do that. Or you could do both of them if you wanted to.
You
Anchor
couldn't
that.
use the middle one.
What's that?
You couldn't use like the middle one to do that.
Let's find out. No. It actually, that's kind of weird. No. So the head of the chain, so this is, we're all learning together. Because I had read this, but I hadn't played around with it. I had read that the head of the chain is what controls it. So that's why I thought that video was weird that the dot up there was broken. So yeah, so it's the head dictates where the rest of the alignment is for the rest of the chain.
Because that first one isn't dependent on the second one, but the second one is dependent on the first one.
Yeah, it looked like you
Goes
created.
left to right.
Looked like you created.
I would say you were
constraint
correct.
When you moved the middle.
What'd I do? Oh.
But when you anchor the middle one, then it creates a new constraint showing the relationship between the first and the middle.
When I anchor this one or this one?
That
Oh,
one.
let's see what happened
And
here.
then it makes
Oh,
it has a separate constraint. Like, okay, that's the relationship between the two of them.
I think it might be the same constraint. It just didn't draw this. Well, I don't know, honestly. I mean, it's still constrained.
And then you could probably like constrain the first one to like the bottom of that, and it'll still work.
Well, that fixed all the errors. So,
Except that that dot
Yeah.
is still there.
You could probably
Yeah.
consider the first one to the top now.
boop. Sure.
Yeah, it is very
Yep.
fixed errors.
So also, if you wanted to, and I don't know, who knows why you'd want to. Maybe there's a use case. It doesn't have to go to here. It could go all the way to the parent, and then you can also overlap each other. So that's another thing.
I think Adam said earlier it can get complicated with that.
Yes, it can get complicated pretty quickly. Yeah, these are all simple views, and they can get complicated pretty quickly, which will lead into one of the issues I had with it, but we'll cover that in a little bit. Let's see here.
If you do this, how does it figures out who's on top of who by the order it is in the XML?
Like if you're sitting on top of each other?
Yeah.
I'll go with yes, but I don't know for sure. That's what it always has been like. So it's whatever is the lowest in XML is on visibly on top. And so that's what it's always been, so I'll assume so, but I could be wrong with that. Pretty sure that's right though. All right, so just one more sample. This is the constraint set. So this is just a view. I also threw the animation in here. So if you click on the image here, it'll just do like a little simple animation. And all this is there's two XMLs, which I'll show you, two layout XMLs. And one looks like that, and the other one looks like this. And then you just do the transition manager and apply to, and this is the effect that you get. And I didn't do anything else. I didn't apply any easing or anything. This is the first time I think in Android where I did something with the animations, and holy crap, it like worked right away. I was pretty happy about that. But again, it's nothing complex. Of course, leave it to an iOS developer to want to do something complex. All right, so I did have another activity for the constraint set because we're doing it programmatically. Why isn't this large? We'll just do this. All right, so I have two constraint set or layout files. They're pretty similar. You saw the end result of them. So one I just called big, one was normal, I think. Well, one was just called activity constraint set, and the other one was called, I just added a large on the end. So I have two different constraint sets that I've defined here. Inside the onCreate. This is nothing super fancy. I'm just finding the just real basic, no butter knife or anything like that. Just finding the constraint layout. With these two constraint sets, I'm loading in the constraints into them straight from the XML. This is actually probably something people don't care too much about, but this is where I was saying if you go into the load, this is parsing the XML and looking for the constraints and then throwing them into the constraint set. If you were to do clone instead, dig into there, and go into there. So here, oh, whoops, I skipped the interesting part. So here is clone, and it's doing a layout inflator, so it's actually inflating it, and then it's just passing that constraint set in and pulling out the constraints. So it's calling this method with the constraint layout and then pulling in the constraints. So I thought it was a little interesting. I don't know exactly enough about which one, why you would choose one over the other, but
Yeah, so
what was
those,
it?
do you have to have the exact same views, just laid out differently?
The little that I played around with it, when I deviated from it, it was doing funky animations. I would say that. So it worked. I guess there was an asterisk on there because it worked right away, but only when I didn't deviate and try to do anything crazy, I guess. So I think there's a lot more to be played with this. I think there could probably be a whole nother talk with constraint sets. I'm not getting at all into custom views. And so if you have a custom view and it lives within a constraint layout, that can be a little challenging also. If you give it a width and height of 0 dp, I ran into issues with that. So that's match constraints, but the view itself might not know, so it thinks it's 0. So I think there's a lot that could be talked about with that, and also animations. I honestly didn't play around with them a whole lot. I just stuck to basic, mostly just because I knew the rabbit hole that I could get into with that. But that's a good question. So get this larger again. So all this is doing is it just has a toggle mode method, which is when you click the image, it's just calling this. And it is beginning the delayed transition on the constraint layout. And then it calls this other method, which it's just toggling between the small and the large. So pretty simple on the activity side. And the small and the large. So here is the small version of it. You can see what it looks like over here. Pretty simple. So it's again just a flat view hierarchy, an image view with 2 text views. The large version of this, you can see just looking at it briefly, it's very similar. It's an image view with 2 text views. You have to look a little bit more closely, and it's the layout constraint properties that are a little bit different. So, for example, you can see the little arrow right here. This is laying out below the image here. And in this one, this one right here, it's constrained to the top. And so that's what's putting it below it. So all I did was just change the constraints for the animation. I think you were asking if you had different views and stuff in here, what it would do. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would think you can get into trouble pretty quickly, would be my guess. Which does get back to what I did not play with, which is you could also, so this is a new constraint set right here, and, well, sorry, blow it up. And to get the animation to happen, all you have to do is do this begin delayed transition on the constraint layout and then apply the change to it. You could build this constraint set programmatically also and then just apply it to it. I didn't do that here just because it's a little bit more cumbersome. I'm sure there's use cases where you would want to do that though. So that is it for the demo there. and you guys can play with this if you want afterwards also. All right, so pros and cons of it. You get the flattened view hierarchy, which is more performant. I don't know too much about the ins and outs of that. I do know you always want to strive for a flat view hierarchy, so there's not as much levels to traverse when you're making updates to the layout. Visibly, though, for me, I think this is almost as much important. It's just a lot easier to look at when you just have a flat view hierarchy. That's my opinion, though. Improved app performance. The Android Studio design panel, I actually thought was enjoyable to use and kind of fun. It's, I think the first time I've said that about a little WYSIWYG editor kind of thing. And you get some easy basic animations. Try to throw that caveat in there because I haven't tried much else. I think it could maybe not be so easy if you try to do much more. The cons, it can have a steep learning curve. It's a different mindset, I think, is the reason why it can have a steep learning curve. And I think that also can frighten people away from it. And if people aren't adopting it, then you don't get as much of the community around it. So hopefully people will try it. Modifying an existing constraint layout can be challenging. So I ran into this both with auto layout and with constraint layout, where I would have a whole layout and then I go to play another story and it's like, oh, just add this control right in here, which needs to go in between these two views. So I need to alter these constraints right here and then put it in there and reapply these constraints. And with auto layout and constraint layout, both of which I think I wanted to throw my laptop out the window a couple times, that can be kind of frustrating, and I think that might just take some getting used to it. I got a little bit better with it later on. I often just decided to remove all the constraints on the whole freaking view and rebuild it. I think I actually save time doing that sometimes, but it's not probably the best way to learn. So I forced myself to try to not do that a couple times and actually did it. So, but it can be challenging.
Like when you drag and drop something into it and all of a sudden it creates 10 constraints for you, they use one. Is that what it's doing?
No, it won't do any constraints for you, but if you need to like put something in between two guys that are constrained together, you need to remove the constraint to each other, to the two of them. And then all of a sudden you might have something slammed to the bottom because now that they're not tethered, it might just be tied right to the bottom of the screen. And so you get a lot of things. It's like, whoa, like I didn't want that to happen. I just stay there so I can put this here and I'll reconnect you two, something like that.
Use the chains though. Chains feel like with stack views, get around some of that.
Yeah, I didn't use chains much on the project I worked on either, and I kind of wish I did. That was another thing I decided I don't have time for, but I think I probably should have made time for it. So I know it was a pro, but it's also a con. The Android Studio design panel can be frustrating at times. Like I said, if you're building views quickly, you just want to drag the view in there and then draw a constraint. And then I often am clicking, and it won't let me draw the constraints. I have to click out of it and click back into it. The properties in the top right could be a little buggy also. Sometimes you left that horizontal constraint at 75 and you come back in and it's at 74. It's like, if you're a little anal retentive, that can be very agitating. And so you got to drag it back to 75. I hope that improves with time though. I think it will. It seems like they're dedicating themselves to that. So, adding a custom view to a constraint layout can be tricky. I didn't talk much about this. It's just another pain point that I hit. We had some custom views that we added within a constraint layout and caused us some extra time. So that was also challenging. So just something else to keep an eye out for. And that's all I have. Is there any questions? Yeah.
In iOS, they have a thing where you can, like, it'll do its best guess to add constraints for you. Is there something like that for this?
Yeah, I guess I should repeat the question in this microphone. So in iOS, there is a tool which will add constraints for you, and you were asking if there's something similar. There is. I will admit that I didn't utilize it much because I was afraid. There is this button right here. It's called this little, and it even has these magic-y stars, and that usually scares me. It says infer constraints. It might do a good job. I honestly have never used it. Here, let's put a button here. I don't know. See why it does move up, I don't know. But let's delete them. And what's going to happen here? I don't know. Okay. So I guess where I plopped it, it just decided, oh, if you want it to be there, then we'll constrain it there. And they put in a margin of 131 and 58. So to what extent you can use that, I am not sure.
Can you throw like two more buttons to the right of that button and then press it?
Sure. One. And I will say that's the thing with this tool. I think it's kind of fun to play with. Just seems to, it's pretty responsive. So you want me to highlight them all and press the button maybe?
Yeah, just press it.
Just press it, okay.
Okay.
So so this is also another constraint that I did not talk about. It's constraining, so you see this funky red line right now. It's constraining the baseline of the text in this view to the baseline of this view. So if you ever have problems aligning text, you can also constrain that. It's a little nuanced, but it actually was pretty useful. So I can delete that constraint. Now it might be off a little bit. But yeah, I guess it's not too bad, really. I guess so it just tries to draw the constraints to exactly where they're at on the screen.
Buttons all different ways, but then have the text all in a straight line.
Yeah, yep. So here, let's hold on. Let's do that. And I don't remember quite how to do that, though, so maybe I won't. I don't remember how to draw that. Oh, well. But yeah, I guess you could draw the constraint to align this so it would be up higher. I don't remember how to do it off the top of my head. And to go one step further, I'm pretty sure I actually saw somewhere where you can convert an existing view into a constraint layout. And it'll take a whole view and convert it for you. I haven't played with that either. Yeah, I don't have a sample to do that. So there is that available, though. So, yeah.
What operating systems does this work on?
4.4 and newer. Pretty sure about that. This project is 5.0 and newer. It's targeted, Min SDK is 5.0, but I'm pretty confident it's 4.0 and newer, or 4.4 and newer. Yeah.
Do you see this becoming like the de facto standard?
So I guess my opinion, I would say no, only because I think everybody's very into what they do. And I think this will grow in popularity, though. It hasn't had much time to get a movement behind or a lot of people to use it. I think a lot of people are like, hey, this might be buggy. Let's let this like settle a little bit, and then we'll start using it, especially if it's in a bigger production app. Or let's let people use it and see what they say about it. So I think people will use it more. I enjoyed it. Like I said, we did run into issues with it, though. So I think you need to know what you're getting into before you use it. I do think it is improving, though.
Does it work well with other types of layouts? So you said that the custom view stuff didn't work very well. So could you throw a constraint layout and then have a relative layout inside of that that handled your custom view?
Yeah. So if I have a relative, here, let me make this larger. So basically put like a, linear layout here, let's say. Linear layout. Let's just do that and wrap content, I don't know. Orientation. Ooh, vertical, is that what it is? I've been too long. All right, let's put a button in there. Text equals, whoops. All right, so there's a linear layout. So you can see over here, there's in your component list, there's a linear layout. And this is where I say it's useful. If you click out here, you might have a hard time clicking that linear layout. I made it the whole width, so it's a little easier. But I can just click on this right here, and there's the linear layout. So I can move this right here, and then have it be constrained like that. And I can even, let's just say I didn't want the width to be match parent. I can change it right here to be 300 dp. So just like any other view, and then constrain it that way. Now it's going to be on the right. Now this constraint layout, while it's drawing that button right there, you can't constrain things to this. You can see there's no constraints on that view. It's within the linear layout. So if I add another button, it'll just act like a regular linear layout. So It does work relatively well with other standard components. I didn't actually notice any issues, other than that from a mindset perspective, it can get maybe a little odd.
You can constrain to the linear layout itself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the linear layout is a peer of the, well, it's right underneath the constraint layout, 2 layers down it doesn't know about. Unless, of course, this were itself a constraint layout. Then it would have its own set of constraints. But the outer can't constrain to the inner.
Can you add a button straight to the linear layout from this editor?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, actually, you see how it's got that green box?
Yeah.
And then in here, it kind of like went away. So, yes.
Cool.
That is cool. I agree. Nice to know. Although that encourages bad behavior, in my opinion. I like to keep it like nice and flat, but yep. Yeah.
Is the goal of the flat hierarchy to not have other layouts in there to get this like nesting?
That's my personal goal. So maybe not everybody's. But yeah, to avoid nesting, I would say, to me, I interpret the main use case of a constraint layout is to not have a nested hierarchy. So, which if you have a larger app and you've got all kinds of nesting going on, you can easily, how deep was your nesting that you've seen in?
There's big performance issues when you start getting a few hierarchies that have a really deep tree.
You've seen more complex layouts than I have, is my point.
Especially depending on types of layouts, sometimes it can take 1 or 2 passes to go to measure everything and figure out where things need to be, and then copy it back up, and then pass it back down. You can do it all at 1 layer.
It's probably nitpicky if you're just talking 2 or 3, layers deep. It's more of just, I would say, for me at least, the goal is to keep it flat, and just have a good reason if it's not going to be flat, is how I look at it at least. Yep. Any other questions? Cool. I think that's it.